Does the government work for us or do we work for the government? We all know what freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and freedom of religion mean. But what about freedom of contract? Tonight, the freedom many of the protesters don't understand, but which they freely exercise. Last night, Freedom Watch offered an open letter to the Occupy Wall Street protesters. We defended their right to protest. Protest is a right as old and as cherished as any that we have. It's guaranteed from government interference by the First Amendment. That amendment guarantees, among other things, freedom of the press, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and freedom of assembly. All these together encompass freedom to protest. Our freedoms come from our humanity, and they are as natural to us as the fingers on our hands. Often the government, no matter which party controls the Congress or who is in the White House, claims that our freedoms come from the government. That view is contrary to core American, Western, and Judeo-Christian values articulated in Jefferson's iconic phrase in the Declaration of Independence that we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The phrase endowed by the Creator and the use of the word inalienable reflect the view of the founders that our rights are integral to our humanity, gifts from God, not from the government. I suspect that so far the Occupy Wall Street protesters are with me on this, as they know that on the issue of their right to protest, I am with them. Are there other rights that come from our humanity? Well, of course there are. Remember the mindset of the founders when they wrote the Constitution. They had just fought a bloody war against a king who was an absolute monarch, a king who could silence whomever he wanted, take whatever property he coveted, and impose whatever law he wished. He could regulate any behavior, tax any event, reach deeply into any life, and take away anyone's rights. Not because he had the moral authority to do so, no government does, but because his soldiers were obedient to him and because they had guns. All this monarchical power was repugnant to the framers, and essentially they wrote the Constitution to assure that no government here would do to Americans what the king had done to the colonists. The Constitution lists our rights in the Bill of Rights and elsewhere that the government cannot take away without due process. The Constitution also says that our rights are too innumerable to list. The due process requirement means that Congress cannot just enact a law. The president or a bureaucrat cannot just issue a command that takes life, liberty, or property. Our lives, our freedoms, and our property can only be taken by the government after due process. That means a fair trial before a neutral jury and a neutral judge, at which the government must prove a violation of a fair law that applies to everyone. One of the rights specifically addressed in the Constitution, this is a right the big government crowd hates, like the right to keep and bear arms, is freedom of contract. Freedom of contract is your natural right to trade your energy, your ideas, your talents, your skills, your time, your freedom, and your wealth with anyone who voluntarily wants to trade with you. This encompasses your right to purchase food, to go to work, to make an investment, to own property, to do with your money as you wish, to combine with others and buy a business. All of this free from government interference. That's what the word free is supposed to mean in free market and free enterprise. It means free from the government. The Occupy Wall Street protesters are exercising this right of freedom of contract perhaps without realizing it. They bought their sleeping bags, their iPhones, their blue jeans, and their food, essentially unmolested by the government because of the freedom of contract. Can you imagine how oppressive and dreary life would be if we needed the government's permission every time we wanted to exercise this freedom? And yet, that's what some of these protesters want. They want the government, which has a monopoly on force, to take from those who have exercised freedom of contract successfully and give it to those who have not. They want those who are good at exercising their freedom of contract to get the government's approval before they exercise it. They want the government to use its monopoly on force to violate freedom of contract, not their freedom of contract, but those whose success they envy. And yet, many of those same protesters do understand this freedom. They want to end the Fed. They want to end the wars. They want to end the IRS and stop the government from picking winners and causing losers. And then they want the government to leave them alone. So, to those fearless crowds in Lower Manhattan, I may disagree with what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. But when you defend freedom, How about defending all of it? From New York, defending freedom, everybody's freedom, every night of the week. So long, America.